And I have a really exciting conversation up now. I'm really thrilled to invite Jaz Brisack to the stage for a very, very special fireside chat. Jaz is the organizing director for Workers United Upstate New York and Vermont and is a true inspiration. And I don't use this term lightly. She is a badass, and she is truly somebody who is a heroine. And I was so honored to meet her in person last night after hearing about her for so long. So I can't thank her enough for being here. You have to give her a round of applause before we start. So Jaz, thanks again.
Thank you.
It's so great to have you here. You have done something truly extraordinary with a group of baristas. You organized a union at one of the largest multinational food and beverage companies in the world. In the world, everyone. No one thought a union at Starbucks was possible. And what you and your colleagues have done is, again, it was nearly impossible, but you've done something that has led to hundreds of victories at Starbucks stores nationwide. And I want you to share with this audience what inspired you. Why do this? This was impossible to do, and you did it.
We didn't think it was impossible. Maybe naively. Definitely naively in terms of, there was a large part of us, both individually and of our team, that believed that Starbucks was actually going to respect the right to organize, to sign on to the fair election principles, a set of corporate conduct, guidelines for how companies should behave during union elections that sets a higher standard and an equal playing field. And we thought Starbucks was going to do that because, they said they were a different kind of company, and they said that they believed in Black Lives Matter, that they were a safe space for LGBTQ people, that they were, different and more equitable, and that they didn't believe in hierarchies. So maybe stepping backwards for a minute, the origins of the Starbucks campaign in some ways were in the industrial union strategy of the industrial workers of the world from like 100 years ago. Because their whole organizing model was you can't just organize one company. You have to organize all of the companies and then, have the general strike, overthrow capitalism, all of that. So we were saying, okay, we can't just organize one coffee shop, Gimme Coffee in Ithaca, New York, which organized in 2017, became the first ever baristas union in the country. Spot Coffee in Buffalo, which we organized in 2019, was the biggest restaurant chain at that time to unionize. You have to build density and actually change the entire industry so that people aren't undercutting each other. So that was what led us. Right after Spot Coffee, I met with a Starbucks worker about organizing their workplace. And they started trying to put together an organizing committee in December 2019. And then Starbucks fired them, allegedly for cussing. I'm telling you, if Starbucks fired people for cussing, none of us would have ever had a job at Starbucks. But that was what they did to try to prevent people from organizing. As soon as they got the smallest inkling of what was going on, they would fire people. So that was what led me to get a job at Starbucks, to try to, preempt them from being able to root it out and actually see if we could build a Buffalo coffee project.
Sure. Can you explain to this audience what actually Starbucks workers are demanding and why?
So when we were talking to our coworkers about why we should organize, why this was, a good move, everybody was like, well, why wouldn't we? Because Lexi Rizzo, who was recently fired, was a 7-year Starbucks worker who'd worked at the company since she was 17, and she was pro-union because it aligned with all of the reasons that she had wanted to work at Starbucks in the first place. And her line was, we fight for what we love. And, we were talking about everything from, having a seat at the table. Starbucks has an empty seat at their board meetings to symbolize partners. And we were like, well, why has no partner ever been in that seat?
Right.
To demands like credit card tipping, which Starbucks never had credit card tipping in 50 years because they would have to pay a little extra percentage for each transaction, and that wasn't worth it to them. And we said, with a union, we can demand things like that don't mean that much to the company, but would mean so much to partners. And, they've shown through their anti-union campaign that it was never about, even the economic parts. It was all about power and control.
I want you to sort of dive deeper into that, because that's really, I think, key to why many of us who thought Starbucks was this enlightened company, right? We're like, oh, it's okay to go here because we like Howard Shapiro, right? But what you're absolutely right. They're talking about power. They want to concentrate power and not allow workers literally to have a seat at the table. This is key to why you wanted to do this.
Exactly. So the president of Starbucks North America, Roxanne Williams, moved to Buffalo right after we announced that we were organizing, and her entire job was fighting the union. She said that she was there to support partners and revitalize this market, that clearly we were having issues or we wouldn't be wanting to unionize. She told me that she was in my store because we had a carpet in the back room of the store, and clearly that necessitated the president of Starbucks North America bringing all of these execs to rip out a carpet in the back room of one Starbucks out of 9,000 stores. Sounds legit. But no, in the captive audience meetings that Roxanne ended up leading, I was trying to explain to her and to my coworkers who were on the fence or being told all these things about what unions were, that it wasn't hostile, it wasn't, an act of war. They might have made it into a war, but we weren't. And that all we wanted, was for this company to no longer be top-down. And she was like, have you read any of Howard's books? He doesn't believe in anything being top-down. And then he came to Buffalo and talked about the Holocaust to try to dissuade us from unionizing, which didn't work. But time after time, he was willing to go to any length, any inappropriate length, to try to preserve his own power and talk about, creating this kind of company where, he was so proud of the benefits that he was giving, but if workers actually wanted a say in those benefits or, to demand anything above what he thought was appropriate, suddenly that was the enemy.
So these captive audience meetings, I don't think a lot of people in this room actually understand what that means. What happens?
So if you're a non-union worker in a workplace, management can call you into a meeting, often with little or no notice. They can call you into a group meeting or a one-on-one with as many corporate people as they like and tell you all of the things that they don't want you to do about unionizing, all of the threats that it's legal to threaten workers about unionizing. There's certain threats you can't make, but there's lots of threats that you can lawfully make. And it's incredibly intimidating. I mean, workers were wearing smartwatches into these meetings that were sending them heart rate notifications about, are you in a stressful situation? Your heart rate is through the roof. And Starbucks would come in, make our stores feel like war zones, bring in 6 managers into one Starbucks to surveil everyone, be present at every hour of the day, and then tell us, vote no, because don't you want to put an end to this tension in your workplace? So the disregard that they showed for workers, sanity and safety at every step of the way, including weaponizing information they had about people's mental health situations and intentionally trying to exacerbate anxiety and any concerns, was just unprecedented.
So we're talking about mental health and not having any concern for that. We're talking about sort of physical safety. That leads me to sort of want to know more about what happened during the pandemic, because we all heard about Starbucks workers being threatened by people who didn't want to wear masks. People were placed in sort of unsafe scenarios very regularly.
Yes, I mean, one of the Starbucks in Buffalo never closed the entirety of the pandemic. They were drive-through only, but there was a line of cars 2 hours long down Sheridan Avenue in Buffalo because people wanted their caramel macchiatos and their sense of normality. In the beginning, I would say, at least at my store, we were enforcing mask mandates corporate policies were different than what we were, sometimes doing in the stores, because we were our own pandemic isolation pods.
Sure.
We were looking after each other. When people couldn't afford, to buy groceries and pay rent, people were chipping in to help each other. All of that was happening organically because people cared about each other. And when we started unionizing...
And the company didn't.
Oh, sorry. Yes, the company didn't. When we started unionizing, that became really apparent,
right.
because corporate came in and told us, wait, you're not allowed to enforce mask mandates. We need to make sales. And actually, our store was the first in the country to go on strike, which we did within less than a month of winning our union election, because corporate wasn't letting us enforce any COVID safety protocols at all at the height of the Omicron virus. And our people were passing COVID to each other in the store. No one who went on strike caught COVID, but almost everyone who didn't did. And I think that underscored, not just to us, but to partners across the country, that this was a way that people could protect their lives and, also win all the other things that we were trying to fight for.
Absolutely. So levels of intimidation, very high. Levels of coercion, really high. Levels of, just general meanness to workers, very, very high. Can you tell us about the effect that had on someone like you, and also the friends you made, the other baristas, just the sort of the mental and physical toll that must take every day?
I mean, I think in a lot of ways, unionizing brought people closer together, and coworkers like Michelle, who'd been at Starbucks for 12 years, told me that, they'd never been more... Starbucks is all about connecting with people, at least that's what they say. Like, we're going to connect with the customers, we're going to connect with our partners. But the union was actually truly connecting people and truly, transcending kind of superficial relationships. But at the same time, Starbucks weaponized everything they could. And there are partners who were fighting, mental health battles, and who were targeted by Starbucks union busting campaign. And one of our original organizing committee members in Buffalo died by suicide after months of Starbucks retaliation. Was that, I can't say Starbucks was responsible for that, but it was months of union busting before that happened. And I don't think that there's a separation there.
Sure.
I think the psychological warfare that companies put workers through is completely unmeasured and undocumented. And that's what the tension that they're creating through captive audience meetings, through preventing workers from transferring in or out of stores that have union campaigns, through changing people's schedules to either schedule them to the max, make them close one night and come back to open their store early the next morning, or slashing people's hours. All of this is calculated to either force people out or push them to the point of burnout, of apathy, of, can I maintain this? And many workers, have ended up in hospitals as a result of union busting.
Gosh. This term that you've used, weaponization, it's also used because these are folks who are not making great wages. I know Starbucks often talks about great wages, but they're not that great. And we are at a summit around access and affordability and empowering consumers, but I think it's very difficult for most of us to understand what it's like to be a single mom or a single parent trying to feed your kids on a Starbucks wage. And I wonder just why Starbucks doesn't think about living wage and fair wage in a way that would benefit its workers.
I think companies are always going to put profit ahead of people, and unions are the only way to ensure that workers actually have a say in preventing that. Companies can always say that, we don't need a union, look at how great we're doing. But the bar is going to be as low as the industry sets it. And without unions, that bar has gotten lower and lower to the point that, nothing is keeping pace with inflation. Non-union competition within the restaurant industry means that margins are unlivably low. So it's not about being, an individual bad actor or a good actor, although Starbucks is, of course, a bad actor. But even good actors are still well below living wages because the entire industry is predicated on poverty wages. So I think that's where industrial unionism isn't a threat to the industry. It's the only way to actually make it sustainable and equitable and healthy for the public and for the workers. Because we just organized a tiny cafe in Buffalo called Remedy House, and the owners there signed the fair election principles, recognized the union, and in bargaining, they were like, well, we're already paying better than most of the industry. Like, can you organize the competition and then, make them do better and then we can do better? And I think that's what a smart response from companies would be.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. No, I mean, if all companies could sort of follow that example, no matter what size, I think it would be so helpful. I think what's so exciting about what you and your colleagues have been able to do is create so much momentum in other, retail environments with Trader Joe's and Ben & Jerry's. And I'm wondering if you can talk specifically about the Ben & Jerry's example, because that is an example that a lot of companies could look to.
No, exactly. So for context, this code of conduct, the fair election principles, we've been trying to get companies to sign on to, ranging from Nissan to Starbucks. Earlier this spring, the Scoopers at the Ben & Jerry's Scoop Shop in Burlington, Vermont, their flagship retail store, reached out, and they'd been dealing with lack of training and lack of support around the opioid crisis in Burlington, and being able to engage people. No one had Narcan training. No one had, adequate de-escalation training. Management was, saying, oh, you can't have your tip jar on free cone day because we don't want people having to pull out cash. And workers were like, that's our only source of, income on free cone day to supplement. And they organized, saying explicitly the same things that we said at Starbucks. We're doing this because we love our jobs, because we want to make Ben & Jerry's the best it can be. And unlike Trader Joe's and Starbucks, Ben & Jerry's responded by signing the fair election principles, which made them the first multinational company to do so, and saying, okay, we're going to bargain. We're currently in bargaining with them, and they've said, okay, it's peace, love, and ice cream. That you can't fight a union and have peace, love, and ice cream. So I think there's hope for models that don't have to be wars, but
yeah, it doesn't have to be a war. And I think you said something very key, that baristas and scoopers and the folks who work at Trader Joe's, they love their jobs.
Yes.
They like working there. They like the camaraderie. They like their coworkers. Why make it a war zone when you could make it, a more enjoyable place to work and to be, a manager of or a corporate executive at, right?
Exactly. I mean, Howard Schultz has gone so far as to say that everyone who's organized a Starbucks was some kind of outside agitator because, I had a union background, so therefore everyone else who was sympathetic to unions at Starbucks couldn't have just actually believed in what Starbucks claimed to have believed. They had to have been brought in from outside. But I think, the truth of the matter is almost every worker, absent an anti-union campaign from a company, would want to organize their workplace. And people who don't care about their jobs aren't going to put the effort in.
Right.
So the people who are actually motivated to take the action to organize and to dedicate themselves to it are actually the people who care the most.
Absolutely. In the few minutes we have left, I'm hoping you can give advice to two sets of people. One is workers who are seeing this momentum, especially in food, and want to make a difference. And then, so answer that first, and I'll ask my next question.
So to that, I would say there's no unorganizable workplace. There's only workplaces that haven't been organized yet. If you have a job, you need a union. And
woo, woo.
I think, it's up to the labor movement to meet the needs of all of these workers and all of these workplaces that have been called unorganizable, too small, too precarious, too high turnover, whatever. That's unacceptable. And I think whether it's, independent unions like Trader Joe's, the Chipotle Union of Teamsters had to call up a bunch of unions before they found one that would take them on. But I think, we have to build union density in this industry, and that's going to take the entire labor movement working together, both to organize and then to actually hold these companies accountable. Starbucks still hasn't paid any consequences.
So my last question is, what's your advice for all of us? When I go to the airport tomorrow and my coffee choices are very limited, do I boycott Starbucks? Do I tip the workers? What is it I should do?
I think boycott Starbucks. At some point we have to say, line in the sand, you've gone too far, this isn't enough. In Ithaca, New York, which was the first city in the country to have 100% union density across the Starbucks. There were 3 stores, all of them organized. Starbucks closed every store in retaliation for union organizing. And the Ithaca community, from the Cornell students to the broader community, are saying if Starbucks is done with Ithaca, Ithaca is done with Starbucks. But I think, broader, trying to help people organize. We had stores that organized because customers planted seeds in people's minds about why aren't you union yet? And I think that's a good starting point.
So that customer support is really, really
yes,
influential and empowering for both consumers and the baristas and other workers.
Yes.
That's great. That's great. Because it is teamwork. It needs collaboration. It needs all of us to be involved. Jaz is my heroine, and I can't tell you what it's like to meet somebody like her who is so young and so vibrant and doing such incredible work. So thank you so much for being here. You came a long way.
Thank you.
Give you a hug.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.